Welcome to Underpinned with Dr. Tim Myers and Russ Harris. Join us as we open God's Word and dive in for a better understanding of the Scriptures and how they should be applied to everyday living.
Welcome back to Underpin, and in this episode, Russ and I are going to be, Russ is actually going to be leading the study on Job and the trials that he went through. Last time, if you remember, we were talking about Habakkuk dealing with trials that don't relate to us necessarily personally, but can affect us and make us depressed and so forth on a national or global level. Here we're going to see, if you're familiar with Job at all, oh my goodness, the problems he went through. He did lose everything, but still he was able to worship God through it. Right. So Russ, go ahead and take it away.
All right, so Book of Job. This is a lot. There's 42 chapters in the Book of Job.
We're going to cover every one of them tonight.
Hang with us, guys. We're in for a long day. No. This is going to be a big summary and focusing on a synopsis of what happened to Job and how he reacted and how God came through and acted on his behalf through all of this. So, I'm sure, as Tim said, if you've been in church at all, you're familiar with Job and his story a little bit. So we're just going to kind of jump right into it. In chapter 1, we see the whole situation really starts off because at this point in time, Satan comes before the throne of God. With the sons of God, it says, it's talking about angels there.
Right.
And Satan could come before the throne of God. And so it's almost like, if it were a modern conversation, kind of like God says, so Satan, what have you been up to? What have you been doing? And Satan's like, yeah, I was just walking around here on the earth, which was his domain, and seeing what's going on. So I'm going to read those verses first, starting with verse 6 in chapter 1. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, from where do you come? So Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? So Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. So God brings up Job to Satan and says, see, here's this blameless man. He's upright. He does everything pretty much that I want him to do. He tries his best to live a godly life. And so Satan's like, as always, he's the accuser. He's the one trying to tempt and trying to get righteous people to fall.
Uh-huh.
So even before God, even to God's face, Satan says, yeah, well, there's a reason Job is so faithful to you, God. You've blessed him so much and you protect him. If he was having trouble, he'd just turn around and curse you to your face. He would not stay faithful.
Yeah. If we can just go back just a little bit, he said Job had owned 7,000 sheep.
I'm getting ready to go through all of those blessings.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about
that.
Oh,
no, that's okay.
Yeah.
But jump back to the first because that's exactly.
All right.
That's what I was doing next.
Oh, okay. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen. I didn't used to know exactly what an oxen was, but it's basically a working cow. Mm-hmm. In other words, they're put to pull wagons and stuff of that nature.
And a yoke would be 2.
Right.
So if there's 500 yoke, then there'd be 1,000 of them.
Yeah, exactly. And 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. And he also, it mentions too, that I didn't read, but he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters.
Yes.
Of course, he had a wife too.
Yes. So he was hugely blessed. Satan was not wrong in what he said here. He was absolutely stating the truth. And we talked before a couple episodes ago about how Satan usually does that. Mm-hmm. He'll start with the truth. Yeah. And then he'll either try to twist the truth itself or he'll try to use it and bend that reality like he is here. God, Job's only faithful to you because you've given him all this, and you keep him protected. So this is kind of the conversation that they've had here. So he's blessed him. We see all of that, and then in response to Satan's accusation that Job will curse God if he doesn't continue to bless him, we look at verse 12 for God's response to Satan. The Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person. So all of Job's possessions, all these things I blessed him with, it's fair game. Just you can't lay a hand on his body. That's all. His health and his life are exempt. So first of all, and there's so many things we can get out of the book of Job, but just as a little aside, Satan's getting ready, and we're getting ready to look at how Satan attempts or tests, sends Job through these trials. Satan can do nothing without permission from God.
Right.
And I know I personally forget that most of the time when something happens that I don't like. You know, what's it say? He will not allow us to be tested beyond what we're able, but with the temptation make a way to escape so that we can bear up under it. This is saying the same thing. Satan wanted to tempt and test Job. He couldn't do a thing except bring him up to God until God said, okay, you can go test him, but you can only go this far. And God does that for each of us. And so, such a comfort that even in trials, God's still in control. Even if he's not the one directly causing the test, he's allowing the test, and we know he's allowed that because it's happening. If he had not allowed it, it would not be happening. God is sovereign. He's always in control. But it's hard for us to remember when we're in the midst of it.
Correct.
So we get this directive, or Satan gets this directive from God. You can do whatever you want to the stuff he has. You just can't touch him. And so Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, it says there in verse 12. So in these next...
he didn't waste any time to attack Job.
No, he jumped right into it. And then in 13 to 19, we get a description of what Satan does to Job. So there was a day when, remember, 7 sons, 3 daughters, they would gather in the house. It said up in, we didn't read verses 4 and 5, but says periodically they would all gather in one of the children's homes, and they'd have feasting and all of this. And it even said that Job would, periodically, he would go offer sacrifices for each one of his children, just in case they had done something wrong. That's how much Job loved God and wanted to take care of his. So on a day, all of his kids were at the oldest son's house, eating and drinking, having a feast, and there was a raid. So they were eating and drinking. A messenger came and told Job, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabaeans raided them and took them away. Indeed, they killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So the first thing that happens is foreigners come and steal all the oxen and all the donkeys and kill the servants that attended them. Verse 16, while he was still speaking, another servant came up and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So it was already the ox and the donkeys, and now it's the sheep and all the shepherds, except for the one. And notice how Satan left one person alive each time so that they could go and report to Job and give him the bad news, because he wanted Job to get all this bad news. He's trying to get Job to turn and curse God. So verse 17, while this servant was still speaking, so this is boom, 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 one after the other. No period of time in between. While he was still speaking, another servant came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands, raided the camels, and took them away. Yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. So now it's the camels are gone.
In your Russ, in your studies, did it ever explain what the fire of God was?
Not specifically.
Yeah, I think again, this has been a while since I've studied Job in depth, but I think it refers to a tornado.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I was just
in
assuming.
other words, it's kind of a, what would be the right word? A colloquialism
Right,
for that.
right.
For
And
that.
I don't know if I've ever heard that or not.
Yeah.
I just always assumed that it was. Satan is a very powerful
Yeah.
individual. He's the prince of the power of the air. Fire burns
Well, he
in
can.
air.
Yeah.
Seems to me he can mimic some of the things that God
Right.
does,
Right.
like in Egypt with the plagues and all of that.
Uh-huh.
So I just always assumed it was actual fire and consumed them. But it could have been either way. Either way it happened, this was under Satan's
Right.
direction.
Right.
His power, and he did it. But that's an interesting. I don't think I'd heard that before. So they let's see, the fire of God fell and burned up the sheep. Then the Chaldeans came, took the camels, and now, because that wasn't enough, another one. While he was still speaking about the camels, another one comes in and says, "Your sons and daughters were in their oldest brother's house, and all of a sudden a great wind came from across the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house, and it fell on the people."
That's where the tornado.
That's what I would have
yes.
assumed the tornado was.
Yes, yes. I'm sorry about.
No, that's all right.
Yeah, I wasn't reading far enough.
So
there.
yeah, now
Yeah, the fire of God is a mystery to me. Yeah,
yeah. So
because Satan caused it,
Right.
but it says fire of God. So
yeah.
well,
Well, and
Yeah.
I think that's probably the perspective of the servant,
sure,
because I
Yeah.
mean, back in this time, God did do miraculous things.
right, sure,
I mean, think of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Fire fell from heaven
right,
and consumed the sacrifices and stuff. So they would think it's from God if it came out of heaven,
Mhm.
right? Whether it
What
was,
if it could be lightning?
it could be lightning if it's a
Uh,
natural. If he
yeah.
used something natural,
Because that's what it was when you mentioned about Elijah.
yeah,
Because it hadn't rained for 3 years, and all of a sudden, that was the beginning of the raining come.
right,
The rain's going to come.
yeah,
So it's probably with lightning that struck the sacrifices. And also refers,
could have been,
they refer to it as fire.
right. And
So, okay.
so yeah, and I've always just again with that one too. I assumed it was
Mhm.
the fire of God fell from heaven. Fire fell. God can do that.
Yeah.
Maybe Satan can do that.
Lightning has probably, oh gosh, here I'm trying to be scientific, but I think it has as much heat as from the surface of the sun when it strikes.
Pretty, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's very,
it is
very
incredible.
hot.
It is. And so I don't know. I've always just assumed it was a supernatural thing. I've never taken the natural
Well, I mean, the
explanation.
timing would
Well,
be
the-
supernatural.
I mean, yeah. Regardless of
Yeah.
whether it was lightning or an actual just
Yeah.
God sent
A
fire down,
fire.
or in this case, Satan sent fire
Yeah.
down. It's all supernatural.
Right.
And that's why this whole thing, it was, the ox and the donkeys, and then the sheep, and then the camels, and now a tornado comes and blows down the house. Only the house where the kids were, too.
Yeah, right. You're
It was
right.
just this one house. It wasn't like a big tornado came and devastated the countryside. It was just this one, just the house,
Mhm.
just where his kids were. And they were all killed, and only
Except
this
the one servant who came.
yeah, again, the one servant each time. Tell me that wasn't deliberate by Satan. I
Right,
guarantee
right.
it. He wanted this one servant from
Yeah.
each one to come and hit him. Boom, 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 boom.
Lucky
boom.
guy, I guess.
Yeah, right? So here we are. I alone have escaped to tell you. So Job is in the middle of this. He went in moments from being one of the most blessed men on the earth to being completely devastated. He's
Yeah.
lost everything.
His fortune.
He's lost his
and
fortune.
family.
He's lost his kids. He has nothing left here. And so, I mean, how would you react in this kind of
Oh my
situation?
gosh. I mean, just your fortune alone would be devastating.
Right.
But also losing your kids. Because no
Right.
parent want. I mean,
Yeah.
that's I mean, we want to go before our kids.
Yes. Yes.
And if I can interject something here, when I was in my first pastorate, there was a lady in the community. She did not go to our church. But as the story goes, she had a 12-year-old son, and he accidentally hung himself on a tree swing. At least that's the story.
Right. Right.
and she was so devastated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I remember going to the funeral and just the weeping and so forth. I mean, my heart ached for her.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
But anyway, she didn't go to our church, but for some odd reason, I felt compelled that I needed to help her.
Mm-hmm.
And so I introduced myself. It was very awkward at first and so forth, but it took about a year, and I began to counsel her and so forth and led her to the Lord eventually. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I mean, you never get over something like that, but
right.
But still, I just can't imagine.
Oh yeah,
because I remember seeing what she went through,
right,
and how hard that was for her to trust God. You know, in a situation like that.
Even as a believer, if you were already a believer, how hard would it be to continue to trust God? Which, of course, was Satan's plan here.
Right.
Get him to curse God, get him to turn away from God, because that's his plan for all of us who are believers.
Yep.
So he's in this horrible situation, and we get to verse 20, and his immediate reaction is what any of us would feel: sorrow and mourning and just probably shock and devastation. But verse 20, then Job arose, tore his robe, as was the custom back then, to tear your clothes when you were in mourning, and he shaved his head and he fell down to the ground. But instead of crying and wailing and fussing like all of us probably would do, he tore his robe, shaved his head, fell to the ground, and worshiped. Can you imagine being in an attitude of worship when something has just happened, and knowing that God at the very least allowed it to happen to you, and yet you're going to worship God?
Yeah.
That's an incredible immediate response. And he fell down and worshipped, and he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Oh my goodness, what an amazing view of God that Job had and held apparently all of his life.
Right.
The way God talked about him earlier in this chapter. I didn't have anything when I was born. I'm not going to have anything when I die.
Yeah.
The Lord gave it to me. He took it away. He's still holy, and I'm going to praise him.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, what an example for all of us.
Oh, I know.
And
we would be blaming God. And so
absolutely.
Forth. In the next verse it says, "In all this, God did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing." Oh boy.
In all of this, he did not sin.
I would probably sin.
I would have some sinful attitude and some sinful words coming out of my mouth. I can only imagine.
Yeah, I can only imagine as well.
And I would for a while at least, until God got a hold of me, I would probably feel completely justified in having those attitudes and those words.
Yeah.
And everybody I talked to would commiserate with me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's how we do, right?
Right.
And, well, you have every right to feel that way.
Exactly.
We do have every right to feel upset and mournful and sorrowful and angry and all of those things. We do not have a right to feel like God has done something wrong. We never have that right, because he never does. But that's how we would pretty much all react. But Job did not. He reacted completely without sin. So Satan caused all these things to happen. Job reacted in a completely righteous way, even in his grief. And so we get to chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where do you come?" Satan answered to the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth and walking back and forth on it." Same conversation as the last time. Then the Lord said to Satan, verse 3, this sounds familiar again. "Have you considered my servant Job, that there's none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil?" Same thing he said the first time about Job. And then he adds on, "And still he holds fast to his integrity, although you, Satan, incited me against him to destroy him without cause." So verse 4. So Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. Stretch out your hand now, God, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. So Satan's response now is, he's thinking, well, my first plan didn't work.
Yeah.
So he's got a new accusation. He's going to try plan B here. Well, God, it was just stuff. It was his possessions. So it was bad, but, a man might give everything he has for his life. But now, God, if you threaten his health and maybe his life, then that'll be the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. Then he'll surely curse you to your face. So verse 6, God says to Satan, behold, he's in your hand. You can't kill him. So Satan went out, struck Job with painful boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took himself a potsherd, with which it's just like a piece of pottery, broken pottery, scraping himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes. So he was just scraping those boils. That's how they took care of things.
Yeah.
It wasn't as horrific to them as it was to us, would be to us to do that. We would get medical treatment of some kind.
Right. Ashes here is kind of symbolic, again, of suffering, mourning.
Yes.
Now, it doesn't say it here, but in other passages throughout Scripture, when they went through this period of mourning, they also wore sackcloth. And sackcloth is basically a burlap sack, essentially. I can't imagine wearing it with all these boils and stuff that he had. I just, wow.
Yeah.
But he was really humble before God, that's for sure.
He was humbled.
Yeah.
And so in all of this, all of the loss, the fortune, the kids, and now he's got all these sores all over him, and he's kneeling there in the ashes, scraping his sores, and here comes his wife.
Yeah.
And his wife says to him, do you still hold your integrity? Curse God and die. I saw a little blurb recently online that was a comedian talking about Job and how Satan was testing him and caused all these bad things to happen and took everything away from him, except he left him his wife. and one of the demons told Satan, you left him his wife, and he just laughed. Satan said, I know what I'm doing. I left her for a reason. And that's kind of
to add to his misery.
Yeah. And that's kind of, see a little bit of that here. She's just come and say, get over it.
Yeah.
Curse God and die. It's where look at where you're at now.
Yeah, his faith or her faith was not as strong as her.
Yeah, if it existed at all.
Right.
Who knows?
We don't know.
We know nothing about her other than in this situation she didn't have it, and maybe she did have faith, but it was too much for her.
Right.
Maybe it broke her. And it could happen. It happens to people.
Sure.
So she says, quit holding on to your integrity. Curse God and die. Not just curse God, but curse God and die. Give it all up.
Get this suffering
Get it over with.
Yeah.
And so Job responded to her. He said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? Once again, in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So tells her, quit being foolish.
Right.
God gives everything. Why we don't have a problem taking the good stuff from him? Why should we balk at taking the bad stuff?
So we've mentioned this before, but it bears to be repeated that Rick Warren has said that God is more concerned about our character than our convenience.
Yes.
Now, before all this, we could say that Job was pretty convenient. His life was pretty convenient. But after this, his character was being developed.
Right.
So in other words, God's intention is to develop us and make us stronger, where Satan is always there to destroy us.
Right. And what I notice, what hits me when you say that is, when God first starts telling Satan, have you considered Job? He describes Job, none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. So this is the testimony Job had. He was a pretty darn good Christian already.
Yeah, right.
And yet, even still, God did these things, as you said.
Yeah.
He's developing Job's character.
Yeah.
So it's, no matter how good we think we may be in our spiritual walk, in a good place or whatever, there's always growth to be had.
Yeah.
And God wants to continue that for us. So this is the situation Job finds himself in. Satan has done all of this to try to get him to turn from God. Job has not sinned yet. Now we have Job's friends show up, and to help. And I kind of put that in quotes because it turned out their help was not the best. And so they come along and they help. And in chapter 3, Job's basically just saying,
yeah,
better if I hadn't been bored.
yeah. At least his friends, they show up because it says here, they set out from their homes, they met together in agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. Mm-hmm. And when they saw him from a distance, they said they could hardly recognize him. And they were so overwhelmed, they wept and tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their head. Again, the sign of mourning and everything. And they didn't even speak for 7 days because, they saw how much suffering he was going through.
Right.
And and when we go to funerals or when someone dies and we go try to comfort, the family, I must admit those are awkward moments for me. I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
And you say, "Lord bless you," or you try to quote a verse, and and people said, "I really don't need," they're saying in the back of their mind, "I don't need to hear that." I've heard all this stuff before. Yes. And so it is hard. It's really it's hard to know how to comfort someone in that kind of a situation.
It is, and we're not going to get into it much because there's just too much here.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you brought that up because Job's friends catch a lot of flack.
Yeah,
when
they
people
really
teach
do.
on this.
I mean, they had a fallacy, and you'll touch on this.
Yeah.
But they couldn't get out of their mind, and back in the theology of that time, Job, you must have sinned.
Right.
If you confess your sin, everything will be okay.
Right.
And they come at it from different angles, but again, Job is saying, I don't know if I've done anything wrong.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he is, and like you say, but they did show up, and their intentions were good.
Right.
They were not coming just like they were holier than thou or overbearing. They believed that he had to have sinned, and God was punishing him for that sin. And throughout, there's a lot of back and forth between. They'll say things.
All these chapters.
Job says things, and this goes on. First of all, I want to kind of make a pit stop in chapter 19.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about.
That's one of the key passages
for the whole book.
It is.
And Job's attitude. So chapters 3 through 18 are a lot of this back and forth. The friends are offering these opinions, however incorrect they may be. They're trying to help, and they keep kind of telling Job, you must have done something wrong, and he continues really to maintain his innocence. I did not sin. I promise you, this is not God punishing me for sin. And of course, they couldn't believe it because, like you said, they were taught differently. So then in chapter 19, Job he again asks his friends, "Why aren't you believing me? I'm telling you, I did not sin against God. I promise." And then he prays for relief, tells his friends they're mistaken, that he has in fact remained faithful to God. And once again, in the middle of all this, he praises God. And so we look back towards the end of chapter 19, verse 25. "For I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. After my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. How my heart yearns within me." So he's praising God still, and he's wanting to be with God even if he dies. Even after he dies, he knows he's going to die, and he knows he's going to be with God. And still, I know that my Redeemer lives, and on the earth.
And the implication is God will vindicate me. Let me just jump back just a little bit. I think this is pretty cool in verse 21 and 22. It says, and he's talking to his friends. He says, "Have pity on me, my friends. Have pity, for the hand of God has struck me. Why do you pursue me as God does? Will you never get enough of my flesh?"
Yeah.
Why do you keep doing this to me? But then he goes on, like you said, then he says, one of these days, I'm going to see God. face to face, and he's going to vindicate.
Oh yeah, and in between what you read and what I read. Oh, that my words were written. Oh, they were inscribed in a book. That they were engraved on a rock with an iron pen and lead forever. For I know that my Redeemer lives. So
the other thing is really profound about that statement. In much of the Old Testament, like especially in the Psalms, they weren't exactly sure what happened after death.
Right.
They went to a place called Sheol, the grave.
Yes.
I mean, they believed in some extent that God would reward them, but they didn't know exactly how all that would happen.
Right.
So there's only a few places in the Old Testament. Now it becomes more clear in the New Testament, but this is a very clear statement. I am going to be resurrected.
Right.
And the other major passage that deals with that is Daniel 12. But there's not very many others. Everybody is really not sure.
Right.
What's going to happen.
But Job, he knew.
Yeah.
He knew, and he was certain, and he knew that his Redeemer lives. And so he continues to praise, and then it continues on much in the same vein. Chapters 20 through 37 or so.
To me, another real key verse that really speaks to my heart, and I think is a real key to the whole book, is in 23:10. But he knows, God that is, he knows the way that I take. And when he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold.
Yes.
In other words, when the way metals are tested, they're put into an intense heat. And of course, it's a liquid, and then all the impurities from those, rise to the top.
Right.
Yeah. And then you skim those impurities off, and then you've got a pure gold or a pure metal. And he believes that the testing he's going through, that eventually he's going to be that pure gold.
Yes.
In other words, in spite of everything he's going through. And that's really pretty profound.
It is.
And that's what he's wanting to do with us.
Yeah.
We could use other illustrations, like coal, for instance.
Right.
Turns into a diamond under extreme heat. Okay.
And pressure.
Yeah, and pressure. So, and there's other things we could use too, but you get the point.
Yeah.
But that's what God wants to do with us. He's trying to make us pure.
Yes.
And a diamond or a pure gold.
Exactly. And in those verses in chapter 23 you just read, Job is again, he's throughout this book, he maintains who God is and the right attitude towards God and about his circumstances and all of those things.
I think it's something to be pointed out, Russ, is that not all of our suffering is related to sin.
Right.
In other words, there can be times when we don't know what we've done. As far as we know, we haven't done anything wrong, just like Job, and people don't understand.
Right.
You're to blame. Going back to my first pastorate, living down in Georgia, also for a short time, not living there, but visiting my folks. I would like to say that they were very supportive, but they were more like Job's free friends.
Yeah. What'd you do?
Yeah, what did I do? You had to be to be fired. You were the blame.
Yes.
And I tell you what, that did send me into sort of a spiral of depression to some extent.
Yes.
It was hard to overcome. Even my own family won't even support me.
Right.
So yeah.
And what's hard for us to understand, but Job did, or he had to come to the realization by the end of the book, just like with you and your family. Yeah. They were supporting you the best way they knew how.
Right.
And his friends were supporting him the best way they knew how.
Right.
It wasn't right.
Right.
It was misguided and it was false and it wasn't the support you needed.
Right.
But they thought they were supporting. They were doing the best they could. And we have, and it's hard for us to do that, give that to people anyway, the benefit of the doubt. Even when things are going okay for us. But when we're in the middle of something and somebody comes at us like that, we take it personally. We take it like they're against us, even though they're not.
Right.
It's hard to be that person and be gracious and understand. So, I mean, it's hard all the way around. So Job continues throughout these chapters to maintain his innocence, his good standing before God, and he continues, more importantly, to proclaim who God is and to recognize God for who he is and to not blame God for any of it. He may
He never understood.
He never understood. He always
Because he
wanted to.
never found out that Satan wanted to destroy
Right.
him. He never
No,
knew
not
what
even after at the end of the book.
Right.
He still doesn't know that, and that's okay. And I've said it before in some of these episodes, and since we said it, I'll say it again. God doesn't owe us an explanation
No.
of why.
No.
We ask why. We always want to know
Yeah.
why, and God sometimes chooses to tell us.
Yeah.
A lot of times He does not. It's just how it works. But we need to be okay with that anyway. So we go then chapters 38 to 41, and so
God finally speaks.
yeah. So in 37, Job, his friends have talked, and then Job does pray here.
Yeah.
And then so we get to 38, and God finally responds directly to Job.
Yeah.
And he does that over these several chapters here. And in 39, I think it is, or I don't know which one it is. No, in chapter 40, God tells him several things in 38, 39, and then in chapter 40, Job responds to God, yeah, I am sinful, I'm vile, what shall I answer you? I'll lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, but I will proceed no further. I've given you answers before, but I was wrong. I was out of line, God, so I'm going to put my hand over my mouth. I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, those
now.
earlier chapters, like you said, 38 and 39, God says, where were you, Job, when I created the universe?
Right.
And of course he couldn't.
Yeah. Can anybody describe
why
these creatures do this? Why I did this? Why I did this? And of course, puts Job in his place.
Right.
And he says, I'm not going to answer anymore. And then God challenges Job. In the verse 40, 41. Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you and you will answer me. So, and then he goes through these series of questions, and really they're more theoretical type things.
Right.
The answer's obvious. That no, could you do this? Could you do this? Would you annul my judgment? Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook? Obviously, Job couldn't do any of these things.
Right.
So then we get to chapter 42, the end of it. Job answered the Lord at the beginning of chapter 42. God, I know you can do everything, and no purpose of yours can be withheld from you.
Yeah.
Again, recognizing and acknowledging God's sovereignty. You asked God, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore, I've uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me that I did not know. Listen, please, and let me speak. You said, I will question you, and you shall answer me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore, I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. So, Job repented of the things, the attitudes and things that he felt like he had done wrong. And then at the very end, jump down to verse 10 or so of chapter 42. Let's see, I lost it. Here we go. And the Lord restored Job's losses when he prayed for his friends. So
the Lord wasn't pleased with those friends.
Right. So he told Job to go pray for him.
Right.
And when you pray for him, then I'll forgive him.
Right.
Basically. And so Job prayed for his friends, and after Job was obedient in what God told him, then the Lord restored his losses when he prayed for his friends. Indeed, and check out how God rewarded Job for remaining faithful. Indeed, Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then all his brothers, his sisters, and all of his acquaintances from before came and ate with him in his house, and they consoled him and comforted him for all the adversity the Lord had brought upon him. Each of them gave him a piece of silver and a ring of gold. But here's the real blessings. Now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than he was at the beginning. And we read what he had at the beginning, the 10 children and the thousands of cattle and oxen and all of that. Well, now, twice as much as before. For now he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 female donkeys. And he had, again, 7 more sons and 3 more daughters. And it talks a little about them. And he lived 140 years, saw children and grandchildren for 4 generations.
Yeah.
So Job died old and full of days. So
Yeah.
God rewarded him.
Yeah. I I related some of my story that the Lord eventually allowed me to come out of these dark
Sure.
times. I know there's people that their situations go on for seems like ever.
Right.
And I know it's hard to really go through them, but God will give you the strength.
He will.
And if we have these attitudes that we explained with Job, Habakkuk, Jehoshaphat, David, who else did we talk about, Russ? Is that pretty much it?
Paul and Silas.
Paul and Silas. God rewards faith.
He does.
And it may not always turn out the way we want it.
Right.
But God will be faithful and reward us.
Absolutely.
Maybe, like say, maybe not like Job.
Well, yeah.
Or some of these other characters. Well, I'm not. That makes it sound like they weren't real, but these people in the Bible.
Right.
That it may not be exactly like them, but God is very faithful.
He is, and he never promises all the blessing.
No.
Like the overabundance like this. He promises what we need.
Right.
He promises to provide what we need.
Right.
So it could end up like it did with Job. It could end up that we stay, if this happened to one of us, this kind of thing, we could stay destitute and ill and die. But guess what? Our reward's in heaven.
Exactly.
Our reward is not all the stuff here on earth, and it's not even our health. Those are blessings, to be sure. Yeah. But just because God causes or allows something to happen does not mean he's going to restore it the way he did Job. Like you said, it might not ever happen. And it might happen, but it's going to be a long time down the road.
Right.
And we can't know that. And again, we just have to have faith, trusting in God because he is trustworthy. And he always proves himself to be trustworthy. Any other thoughts?
Oh,
there's
you
so
could go
much.
different directions that we could go.
That's why I
just
kept
thought
trying to pull myself in as I prepared this.
I just thought of the passage in Hebrews 11, the faith chapter, and all these heroes of faith. People mainly, or sermons are given at the first part of that chapter, how God rewarded these people and they saw miracles, and et cetera, et cetera. But when you get to the end, he goes on and say, but some were killed, some were tortured, some were sawed in two, stuff like that. But yet God was, God rewarded their faith.
Yes.
In other words, like you said, they were absent from the body is present with the Lord.
Yeah.
And so as a passage just came to my mind that when things don't always work out the way we want to, doesn't mean that God is not faithful or God is not rewarding. Because our ultimate reward, like you said, is not here.
Right.
It is in heaven.
Yeah. And that's what we have to cling to.
Yeah.
I know it's tough.
Yes.
When you're going through things.
Yeah.
It's tough to do. But as I mentioned before, God promised that with the temptation, which just means trial.
Right.
With the trial, he will not allow us to be tried beyond what we're able to handle, and with it, he'll make a way of escape so we can bear up under it. Now, escape, again, doesn't mean all the good stuff necessarily, but it'll happen. So, this, I guess, concludes our series, on
this.
Praising God in difficult circumstances.
Right. I hope it's been beneficial to everybody that's gone through this.
Yeah, we pray that you've been encouraged by these examples of people living out and experiencing the benefits of praising God consistently. Now, we invite you to join us on the next episode, because next time we're going to have a special Thanksgiving episode, and Christy and Cheryl will be joining us. And we'll just have a time of celebration and Thanksgiving. Yeah. So please join us.
Thanks for joining us today on Underpinned. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your friends. Join us again next week as we continue diving into God's Word. Until then, you can find us at www.underpinnedministry.com and at Underpinned Ministry on Facebook. For questions and comments, you can reach us at questions@underpinnedministry.com. Thanks again for listening.